Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, first of all, before I begin, let's put our hands together to welcome our distinguished panel of speakers to spend precious Saturday afternoon with us to share with us about property insights in Malaysia. And secondly, also put our round of applause to our hardworking events team from PropertyGuru Group to assemble this group together. Let's give them some encouragement. Okay. So, without much further ado, the panel discussion topic today for me is the hotspots in Malaysia. So, since we are talking about hotspots in Malaysia, I would like to first pose the question to Datuk Christopher, being Executive Chairman of Savills Malaysia, to possibly share with us currently in today's market, what are some of the hotspots in Malaysia that investor can evaluate, can look at for investment, especially those that he thinks has some good future potential in Malaysia. Over to you, Chris. Can you help him?
Okay, thank you very much. I think, well, I actually don't like the term hotspots very much because it sounds like you're picking a horse or a particular stock and with the idea of getting rich quick, and property doesn't deliver those kind of opportunities very much. So, you know, given that property is a long-term investment, the hotspots that I would select would of course depend on my budget. If I had a large budget, there is no doubt in my mind I would go and buy a bungalow in Damansara Heights, which is one of the better suburbs of KL, or an equivalent suburb, Bangsa or Bukit Pantai, because in the upper end of the residential market, which I hasten to add is open to foreigners, the turnover has been very low. So occasionally in the last month or so, because of my bad foot, I've had occasion to jump into a grab taxi. The grab taxis are unusual because the driver knows the name of the passenger. And on more than one occasion, the driver's looked at his phone and said, "Oh, Chris Boyd, that name rings a bell." And I'm very sure it's because the driver was at some earlier stage in his life a real estate agent, reduced to driving a cab, because turnover has been so bad. And bungalows that might have fetched 7 million, 2013 or even 2014, are now fetching a discount of up to 20%, but they will come back. If I were in a slightly lower price range, I still very much like the three suburbs that I mentioned, Stapak, Sdn Bhd and Sri Petaling, because again they are in federal territory, KL, but these are older properties, so you have to look for bargains amongst the older properties. Thirdly, I still very much like the idea of Penang, and I like Penang's vision, and as has been said earlier by Ishmael, Penang is going to go places partly because federal funding is coming back into Penang, and guess who's the finance minister? So I think it's got a great future, and it's got a vision, and it could well become a great hotspot. And if I were going to pick a hotspot in the state of Penang, I'd particularly look at property in Batu Kawan area, which is the expansion overflow, if you like, area on the mainland. Fourthly, if there are any developers, particularly those here tonight, this afternoon, who are offering a really solid, exciting guaranteed yield for a number of years, I think that's something that I would also be very interested in looking at. Thank you very much.
Christopher, I don't know whether the Savills do any research in terms of over the past 1 to 3 years. Is there any particular location in Malaysia where you see a surge in buyers' demand, which translate in the form of increase in transaction volume or even transaction prices in some of these locations? Was there any such research that you guys ever conducted in the whole of Malaysia?
I can't recall that we have done any such research. It's quite easy to do, a little bit painstaking. You occasionally see a surge in anticipation of a rise in value resulting from a LRT or MRT station. But it doesn't seem to be, for some reason, particularly sustainable. So proximity to an MRT station, although it's very useful, isn't really what makes the market, if you like.
Okay. So I would like to ask the next question to Ishmael. As we know, Ishmael runs a very successful map-making company in Malaysia, where we know where are the latest MRT station or infrastructure before even the government website publish it. So we depend a lot on Ishmael map for our property investment decision. So I'm sure Ishmael can share with us, as a mapping king, what do you think will be the hotspot in Malaysia in the next 3 to 5 years?
So normally when we talk about the areas you want to look at, of course, being a mapping company, we map out a lot of under construction and also future infrastructure. So where they go, where the interchange, where the stations, these give you an idea where you should at least look out for. Doesn't mean it's the hot spot, but at least you must be aware there's an infra going there. Like during my talk earlier, I was mentioning, if you want to understand, if you look at how cities grow, what is the most key important is where is the economic activity area. So where's the CBD? So if you cannot be within the immediate vicinity of the CBD, where are these infrastructure from and going towards the CBD? Because at the end of the day, where the money is, that's where the value of the property will hold. Or if you want to be a bit more racist, you just go to Malaysia, you see where are all the Chinese staying. Then you have a place of good value. So like Sri Taling is one of the places. Now that is looking at infrastructure. Another one way to try and anticipate a possible area with potential is to look who are the big players, so who are the top developers in the country, and where are they going? Where are they going? Now it doesn't guarantee success in that sense, but you know that these top developers, they are not developers that will just come in, build one project, wash their hand and disappear. So a lot of, if not all top developers, they are township developers. So for a township, for example, is 1,000 acre. You cannot expect them to one shot build 1,000 acre of development. They will start with phases. So in order for them to sell the remaining phases, they'll ensure they do a good job, the first, second, third phases. So I like this type of developer, township. So we have a lot of township developers here today, UEM, Sunway, even Matrix Concept. So for example, like Matrix Concept, they are selling a project in KL, but maybe you are not familiar with them. They are a strong player in Negeri Sembilan, which is just a state next to Selangor, and they are doing very good over there. So they are starting to do their project in KL, to get their hands busy in KL. So these are the kind of background information you should know as an investor. Who are the top 10 and where are they going? So that will give you a good idea. So if you can't figure that out, what do? Find me and check the map. Where is it? Where are they going? So that should give you an idea.
So where can the audience find you when after this event you go back to KL? How can they find you to check to get the map from you?
So it has been true since day one. Every time I come Singapore, there's baggage limitation. There's only so much map I can carry. Usually right after my talk, the map will be all gone. So which is true, all finished. All the maps I brought from KL. the next best thing they can do is they have to go to Malaysia, go to my office and collect the maps. If they don't want that hassle, they keep on lookout, PropertyGuru next event.
Okay,
And
good.
then we're invited, then they come.
Thank you very much. You will definitely be invited. Okay, next, we would like to turn attention to Dr. Lee, who is representing Dr. Tan because Dr. Tan is not well today. What would be Night Friend's view of the hotspots in Malaysia?
Okay, so my background is from the academia, so I probably speak more from a very theoretical, conceptual way. So the way to think about hotspots, right? I agree with what Dr. Christopher says. You know, there's actually no hotspots. The hotspots will develop over time, just at different point in time, which is the best hotspot, and also, of course, the budget that you have. One of the things that we look at from a very theoretical perspective is like what just now Ishmael was saying, economic activity. Interestingly, based on a lot of research, they found that cities, when you rank them by population or wealth, they tend to be very, very, how do you put it, stagnant in terms of the ranking. They don't change. So if you look at KL, KL is the top city, it will stay there. They call it the law of primacy of cities. So one of the things is, even if there's certain things that happen to it, you know, they look at, there's one study that looks at Hiroshima, you know, we know the nuclear bomb, everything, it still comes back. So the city is a very, how should I say, an organism that is very difficult to die, and it will continue to stay very strong, and size does matter. So if we want to look at particular states first, we always go for those that is more populous. So generally that gives you an idea where the KL, Malacca, and then of course Penang, Johor to a certain extent. Now, of course, over time, there was one time I was given this question, what about the tier 2? So I start looking around to Sarawak, you know, Kota Kinabalu area, which is also quite vibrant. Then I realized all these places have a very unique thing. I mean, we talk about Damansara Heights, all these areas, right? They all have KFC and McDonald's. So to know which areas is a good hotspot, you just make sure there's a KFC and McDonald's nearby and it's not closing down. I think it's actually quite safe. Yeah.
On that note, I was also told some analysts used the number of Starbucks in that area as an indication of the consumer wealth and lifestyle. Is that true?
Yeah, so Starbucks, in terms of sophistication, of course, it will be much higher. But I think in Malaysia, in terms of number of restaurants wise, I think it's KFC followed by McDonald's, if I'm not wrong. So those two will probably give you an overall better coverage. So if there's populous, if the place is populous, they definitely will have one, either KFC or McDonald's nearby. Yeah, or Pizza Hut, or something along that line. So when you look at that, that will tell you what kind of income group people. Of course, you must make sure that they don't close down after you buy the house, then that's too bad. But generally, if you realize that they are pretty stable, then I think it's actually a quite a good gauge of the area.
Thank you. Along the way, feel free to raise your hand and ask any question. We can make it very interactive. Otherwise, I will also continue to ask the panelists more questions. So while I pause for the first question, before I move on to the next one, any one of you have any questions you want to ask the panelists? If not, then I will move on to the next one. I would want to go back to Christopher. Okay, just now I took one point that you mentioned, which is Penang. And Penang, you mentioned Penang is also a good hotspot because of the ex-chief minister has now become the finance minister. So we all have known that in Penang, the rental yield is not high. as compared to KL, for example. So, just like you mentioned also Batu Kawan. So what we want to understand is from a foreign investor point of view, what should be his investment strategy and his investment horizon when he invests in a place like Penang. How long do you think a place like Batu Kawan will take to reach a stage whereby it can, generate good returns for the investor? And secondly, will there be a breakthrough for the rental yield in Penang to reach KL level, or we have to live with the fact that Penang rental yield will always be lower compared to KL?
Okay, that's a good question. If you take a look at Batu Kawan, which I mentioned earlier, the state government released, I think it was about 1,000 acres of industrial land as part of the master plan for Batu Kawan. And it was taken up very, very quickly because the traditional industrial areas on the island are all, Bayan La Paz and so forth, they're all chock-a-block. There's no room for expansion. But many of those new industrial facilities haven't been built yet. So the industry hasn't taken the plunge and moved across to Batu Kawan. But I think they will, and strangely, the development of residential property in that area has lagged. There are plans for quite extensive development. Hasn't happened yet. But I think when industry moves across, it will bring with it a demand for landed property in the range of about 5, 6, 700,000 or thereabouts. So I'd be looking for, a new release in that price range. Also, of course, on the island, if you're fortunate enough to be able to find a high-rise in or near the city, bearing in mind high-rise development per se is no longer allowed in the city because of its UN heritage listing status. But there are one or two that are just on the fringe coming up with direct sea views, because these sea views are what people pay for. Then I would also be very tempted to invest in one of these for the long term. Yield, you may not get the yield that you would get in KL. Not that that's particularly high either, but I think not very far off. A good yield on resi property is 5%. A normal yield is about 3%. So you'd be picking your investment, I think, largely for capital appreciation.
Just now you also mentioned a point about picking some landed property that is in a range of 500,000 to 700,000 ringgit, and also high rise. So a common question asked by Singapore investor is when they go to Malaysia, let's say Penang for example, should they focus their attention on landed property or high rise apartment? What are the pros and cons?
Pros and cons. Well, I think everyone knows the pros and cons. If it's for your personal occupation, you go for what you want. Maybe if you want to keep 6 dogs and 10 chickens, then you'll probably go for a landed property. High-rise resi, of course, is much easier to manage and in many cases much easier to let. Whereas landed property offers, is attractive if you're looking for a certain kind of lifestyle. Particularly if you particularly want to park your car in the front porch and go straight into your house. The general rule, I think, is that high-rise tends to attract a better class of tenant if you're looking for tenancy.
And is it true that high-rise offers a better rental yield compared to landed, and landed offers a better capital appreciation?
It can, yes. I think you generally work on an estimate of about 100% appreciation over 10 years. About 5% per annum is the norm. Oh, which brings me back to the sort of stock picking, hotspot picking technique. if you assume that you're going to get over a period of 10 years appreciation of about 100%, or perhaps 5% per annum compound, what you can do is look for those areas that have where capital appreciation has been flat or even negative for the last 3 or 4 years. And we've done that for fun in-house on 1 or 2 occasions, and it's quite remarkably effective because, you know, some locations can give you regular annual appreciation, others will flatline for a while and then catch up. And this does happen, you get this catch up. So if you're lucky enough to hit the market in the right place at the right time, you can ride that little uptick. But sorry, coming back to high-rise resi, the biggest lottery, the biggest uncertainty in high-rise is the quality of the management. Because I think the same as Singapore, management of high-rise is democratic. There is a management corporation which is formed from the owners, and so you're putting an awful lot of trust in the ability of that corporation, management corporation, to manage well and preserve the value of the property. And I think it has to be said that although both countries, Malaysia and Singapore, have strata title acts, plenty of rules about what can and cannot be done and the way that properties can be managed, somehow in Malaysia, value preservation for high-rise is very much tied to the long-term quality of management. And so there isn't very much you can do about it, but you need to see a firm commitment from the developer to ensure that this long-term management will be taken care of properly. So for example, if he has 3 or 4 phases and you're buying phase 1, then the probability is that the developer is going to hang in for at least the next 12 years to make sure that the entire development is going to be run correctly. Thank you.
Thank you. So it seems that there's better risk management if we can get hold of the phase 1 of a bigger township development. Okay, next I would like to direct to Ishmael. Just now you mentioned about follow the big boys, follow the big developers, where they go and buy land and build development. This could be the potential next big thing for the country or for the city. So my next question to you is, so far in Malaysia, what are some of the locations that you notice the big boys are starting to buy land and ready to launch some new projects or townships?
Okay, that's a very good question. But coming back here, at the end of the day, sometimes our audience, I can be mentioning areas, but even if I mention areas like, what do you call that, Cheras, it will not ring a bell. Because most Singaporeans will be very familiar with like Jalan Lampang, Mount Kiara, at maybe Bangsa. So
Bukit Bintang.
Yeah, Bukit Bintang, and maybe like Embassy Road. But other than that, for our current audience, they may not be very familiar. But coming back to your question, looking at, let's go to Greater KL first. Let's go to Greater KL. If I would try to describe the location, you look on the map where Cyberjaya is, to the west of it, there has always been large plots of land. And then you have, in recent years, you have big developers like IJM, Tropicana, then EcoWorld, they are developing. And then you also have developers like Gamuda bringing up areas like this. So I don't think our audience are familiar with some of these locations. But for locals, these are the kind of opportunity really opens up to them.
Then with that as a backdrop, as a foreign investor, they probably cannot participate in this kind of development in Cyberjaya because they probably cannot meet the legal requirement for foreigners to buy. Because I think Cyberjaya falls under Selangor, and then foreigners can only buy 2 million ringgit and above. So within the premise of where foreigners can buy, where foreigners are familiar with, do you have a view in terms of any location where you see some activities risk coming from those big boys?
Those areas are already very much matured. So you either see redevelopment projects, or these are the secondary market that maybe the foreigners, if they put in legwork, and then they can go on the ground and then have access to this kind of opportunity. Unfortunately for Malaysia, sometimes access to information is all over the place. Nothing beats to going down on the site and experiencing and looking at the place. I think that's why some of our developers, participating developers today, they are doing tours. Because they want the audience to, they themselves experience, to know where they are, what they are looking at, and what they could potentially be buying. So putting in the legwork will be very important, will be very key to identify some of these areas. So that is also Greater KL. If you are talking about Iskandar, Malaysia, looking at the map, you can also see a lot of big players. So if you are talking about one of our top developer people like Sunway, looking at the map, you can see how big are their stake in Iskandar, Malaysia. So developers like this, I don't think they are here to just take a gamble and whatnot. They already have success stories like Bandar Sunway. You all will be familiar, for example, Bandar Sunway. So they want to replicate the success in Iskandar, Malaysia. So this kind of move, investors should be aware of. So the players, these are the top players who come down, position themselves. So we follow this type of
Sure.
news, where they are.
Sure. So since you mentioned Iskandar, Malaysia, I think a common question that many Singaporean buyers are contemplating is there's the old JB town next to the Woodlands Causeway, and then there's the new Nusajaya, which is from our Tuas Second Link. A very common questions that Singaporean buyers want to ask is which one will offer better investment value, or what are some of the consideration the buyer need to make in deciding whether to go for the old JP Town area or the new Nusajaya area?
My answer gonna sound like I'm not answering the question. Let me explain first. At the end of the day, both of these localities, generally speaking, are offering different kind of investment approach. Flagship A, which is JB Town, has been positioned for redevelopment, rejuvenation of the city. Whereas Flagship B, which is Nusajaya area, Iskandar Puteri, this is a well-planned township for the future for it to develop. So as an investor, what type of timeline are you looking at? Right. In my own personal capacity, I have positioned my company to start operating in Nusajaya area, because I believe that is a future. So as a company, I'm even positioning myself to start operating. I'm just waiting for the project to be completed, start operating there. But of course, at the end of the day, you're also talking about population movement. How long will it take for us to have the right kind of population for the tipping point to come?
Do you have a view on that?
Yeah. In fact, 4 years back when I'm here in Singapore, I always say, give it 8 to 15 years. Even 4 years back, I already said that. So I still maintain the same position. Give it time, for the population to come in. The only tricky part is the talent workforce. So coming back to our whole theme about post-election, this is what excites me. If you've been following what happened right after election, prior to election, the then opposition, they promised, if we come into power, we will make sure there will be proper check and balance of power. You won't have too much power being concentrated in one person. You don't want a prime minister taking multiple portfolio and whatnot. So what happened post-election? Of course, there was backlash, but Mahathir, he wanted to take the position of the education minister, if you remember correctly. I think he understands for us, Malaysia, to be competitive, to be progressive, we need to improve our education system. So that's why he wanted to personally take charge of it. But it's just that because of the manifesto, there was backlash, so he didn't. So now he appointed a new minister to take. But he gets it. We want to be competitive. You want to retain your talent, improve your education system. So during my talk, I was saying how I'm working very hard to ensure there's education fund, right? In a perfect world, where I don't have to worry about my son's education, is because the public education is already competent. But we are not there yet. But hopefully with the change of government, Mahathir gets it, we are moving to the right direction. That's what I want.
Thank you. I noticed Christopher wanted to say something. Yes, sure.
Probably not my turn, but I'm very curious because, as I understand it, the image of Johor generally in Singapore is that it is a kind of lawless, unsafe place. And I'm just very curious, does everybody share that view? Is that the view of Johor from the Singaporean side? Yes, yes or no? Does Singapore...
Yeah, maybe we
you should
can get
answer
Dr. Lee to answer from, he's from Night Friends Singapore, to share his perspective. Actually, I also want to build up on that question I also wanted to ask Dr. Lee this question about basically in Singapore we have this new cooling measure of additional 5% stamp duty and increase in the LTV for Singaporean investor to buy Singapore property. And we have our neighbor on the other side, a new government. And of course, add on to what Chris mentioned, how would you size up the investment sentiment in Singapore now that we have some push factor from Singapore, and then at the same time, there's some perception about Johor and all that, and then there's also this new government that Ishmael mentioned, that he mentioned just one thing, which is emphasis on education, but there's a whole list of manifesto. So with all these different interaction effect, I want to have a sense of what would be the Singaporean investor view. Will it result in more to Malaysia, or same, or less? What's your take?
Okay, maybe I address Chris' question first. I mean, I don't really visit Malaysia that much. So in the past, I must say, I had that perception. I wouldn't say it's lawless, but it's more, say, in terms of institution and in terms of regulations, it may be there, but it's not being enforced in a way. So there's always this fear of uncertainty, and of course, there's always, the grapevine. There's a lot of stories of people being robbed, etc. And so I think, sharing with most of my Singaporean counterparts, the feeling is always tends to be is slightly more dangerous. But if you talk to another group of Singaporeans that always visit Malaysia to enjoy shopping, to enjoy its amenities, you realize the way they think about Malaysia is, well, it's a bit like Singapore. It's just that things sometimes a bit uncertain, but it's still pretty well managed. So I feel that in all sense, after I also have certain interactions with the government officials, although they probably no longer are, but it's quite interesting. They are very forward-looking. They have the things in place, and I think that for the longest of time we may perceive it wrongly, and this kind of perception may actually cloud our judgment when it comes to investment. Now, talking about the LTV, all these things, I think generally when it comes to Singapore property, people actually are now a bit more cautious. They only look for properties that are either freehold, face the sea, have all the shopping amenities, good schools, everything, But they realize the price is at like $2,000, $3,000 per square feet. Then suddenly it sort of like pushed them. Maybe Malaysia, there's still a chance, but then of course, there's always this uncertainty, and the other thing is about government changes. We say that the government has changed, but what about down the road? Will it change again? There's all this kind of uncertainty in place. So I think for Singaporean investors, there's two groups. One is the more risk-averse. Probably they will still stay in Singapore, buy in Singapore. Then there's the other group that's exploring. And some of them are actually more towards nearing their retirement age, because I mean, you buy a home at Iskandar, one of the well-planned townships. You know, the quality of the product is good. You face the sea, everything, but it's a fraction of what you pay in Singapore. So suddenly it makes sense. And then because you are going to retire, and if retire and it becomes part of the gig economy, you don't need to come in during the rush hours. You are flexi hours. Suddenly everything makes sense. You know, through the second link, during the non-peak hours, it's actually very smooth. And hopefully, you know, the MRT station will be constructed, and then again, there's another way. So again, we see another group of people that are starting to go towards these properties, and they are looking for opportunities, especially like places like Iskandar or Johor Bahru, despite, you know, stories and reports about its oversupply. There are certain parts that I believe still got potential, but like I say, the key thing is where is the economic growth engine? Where are the population is very important. And the population that we are looking at is not the aging population, but really those in the high economic profile in terms like 30s to 40s. So this group of people, where are they working now? So that needs a bit of research, going to the statistics, and going down actually to see to the actual place of work, what kind of people are working there.
I also second Dr. Lee's view that I think there are two segments of Singaporean, the well-traveled group and the stay in Singapore group. So I also belong to a well-traveled group, and my sister go to Johor for shopping every other weekend for the petrol, the grocery, the spa, and then stay overnight at a weekend home there. So for Singaporeans who are well-traveled, who go to Johor, they are the most likely buyers for the Johor property because they are very familiar with the area, and they will find that there's a difference between reality and perception. And when we talk about safety, the reality is also nowhere is as safe as Singapore. So when it's all in relative. Of course, if you compare any city with Singapore, Singapore is always safer. But the moment you go to a place like Philippines or Manila, where you see people holding guns by the shopping mall, suddenly you feel that Johor is safer. So I think it's all in relative. Yeah. So okay. So back to this discussion. Before I go on further, is there any other questions that you guys have? Anyone? Okay, so since no one, I will bring out one burning question that they have. I think one of them mentioned to me just now, which is the most recent deferment, not cancellation, the deferment of the high-speed rail between Singapore and Malaysia. So I would like to pose to the panelists, starting with Christopher, followed by Ishmael. What's your view on this? I think in the minds of the Singapore investor is what's the Malaysian government thinking, and also will this eventually be going through or not? You know, and then what are the risks and benefit that the investor wants to be aware of?
Actually, I gave my view earlier. I think it's good that it's deferred because we didn't have the money to pay for it, and there is every possibility that it will come around again in a couple of years' time. Who knows, possibly at a lower price, and it will benefit both Malaysia and Singapore. Malaysia will do what it does best, which is to accommodate workers, particularly, maybe back office, at a very low accommodation cost. And Singapore will do what it does best, which is just become one of the financial giants of the world. And both will coexist more easily by virtue of this ease of communication. I think the benefit has been overhyped. Just because we're not getting it now, it is not the end of the world for the Malaysian property market. And I think the jury is still out on the benefit of the high-speed rail to all of those intermediate stations, Muar, and where else? Malacca. Malacca, I think, could benefit. Muar, I don't think will benefit. And just because you're getting a station on the high-speed rail line doesn't mean to say that you're going to be the net winner. It may very well take part of the economy away from Muar rather than putting more of the economy and economic activity into Muar. And there are plenty of studies to support this view. But overall, good thing. Glad we're not having to build it right now at that cost, but hope it comes soon.
Of course, from our perspective, we have been best in terms of opportunity for businesses, for talents that we have the high-speed rail. Over the years, every time I touch on this topic, I give example. Why would one country like China have more rail of high-speed rail compared to the whole of Europe? And look at how they progress so fast. So just one country understanding the impact of having businessmen and talent moving from one city to another, how it benefit. So they understood it. In fact, I think if you're talking about high-speed rail, it should have been many years back. We should have had it much earlier. So what we have at this juncture is the current government is saying is an inflated cost, right? So Made, his style is, what's the best way to negotiate? What's the best way to negotiate? You say, we cancel the whole thing first. So everyone will be like, oh, got a shock. If you are the contractor, if you are a landowner, you would want it to happen. So now that suddenly the whole thing is off, then you'll be coming to them and say, let's renegotiate. Let's not just throw the whole thing away. So I believe Made he's not jumping the gun. He's a very smart man. So that's how you have the bargaining chip. Call off the whole thing. Then, okay, let's talk, let's defer, then let's reassess. So if you've been following the media, the minister is saying we have party approaching them at half of the cost, the initial cost, which of course raises a lot of questions. Why was it so much higher? But let's not go into that direction. So that's my take on one thing. Another one that I want to stress on is that we don't want to be in a position where we cut ourselves out from the whole picture of the One Belt, One Road as well. You are talking about countries linking with each other. KL and Singapore, you don't want us to not have that link. Because if you remember, that is just the first phase. You eventually will have a phase where we are linked all the way up, go up north. So this is a very crucial linking. But of course, it's a matter of time. Let the government renegotiate. Another angle that perhaps I want to share is that if you are talking about timeline, realistically speaking, let's say lobbying, all no issue, land acquisition, no issue, just purely the construction, how long does it take? So if you look at the case study like Taiwan, because their distance, their high-speed rail is very close to ours, they took their construction at 3.5 years. So who is to say that perhaps 1 or 2 years down the road, when the government said, let's proceed, they take another 4 years, the original, I'm not promising on their behalf, but suddenly the 2026 doesn't look too far-fetched. They are maybe managing expectation, let's say, 2030. But it's a possibility. If you are talking about construction alone, it can be fast. Whether we have the political will or not, that's a different whole issue. But that's our take on the high-speed rail.
Okay, when the high-speed rail was announced, right, I think when they were asking me where are the hotspots, I was still pointing Singapore and KL. Then probably surrounding areas, because that spill over, because you can't find space in KL and you can't find space in Singapore. So Iskandar probably benefit, and then of course the lower part of Selangor. And the reason being is that what the rail actually connects is people, and people are attracted by one thing and one thing only, money. So where do they pay the highest wages, given that particular skill set is probably in KL and Singapore. That's why you will see the gravitation. And I totally agree with what Christopher said. What happens is some of the cities in the middle, they are just become, they actually is a lose-lose. Now, of course, now after this thing, if we start to rethink about investment, I actually look at this as an opportunity more than a risk. Because in the past is that whatever has been talked about this high-speed rail, a lot of sentiments, a lot of positivity has been capitalized into the price. So it's very high. But now, because it's being deferred, there's a bit of uncertainty, the prices become more rationalized. And I think now becomes a more unique opportunity, because when you buy, and then subsequently they after deferred, probably they say, oh, let us continue again. There's upside to it. Of course, if they say, oh, we should not continue, then, the price probably still stay as it is. Because when you buy it, you are assuming that it doesn't happen. So I think that is the kind of interesting option, value that you can play with from an investor point of view. Of course, there are risks involved. So how do you manage risk? I feel that end day for Malaysia, even without the high-speed rail, all the transportation, interestingly, if they were to build, even if they are not going to build a high-speed rail, will go through certain key cities, KL being obvious one. So I think that if you want to play safe, definitely, and that Malaysia still want to be part of One Belt, One Road, but maybe not linked to Singapore, they may still go through KL. So I think KL is still a very fair bet. But again, I say that when we look at all those things, we also have to take into account of like your investment horizon, and within the investment horizon, whether there will be a change of government in the subsequent phases, which may change again how things may pan out. Yeah.
Yep. So to round up, we also, One Belt, One Road crop up in a couple of talks, whereby we know that what is certain is China and Thailand have signed an agreement to build a high-speed rail linking Kunming in the southern Chinese city to Bangkok. So many real estate watchers are expecting that eventually it will come a time whereby it's possible for Chinese to take a high speed all the way down to Thailand and down to Malaysia and even to Singapore. So I think from an economics point of view, it just makes sense for all parties to do the connectivity eventually. So I think what the panelists have spoken is about money, it's about financial prudence, it's about financial discipline, so which may be also a good thing for the country, because that would mean that the country is stronger fiscally, and what it means is that it's more fundamentals in place for the currency and for the economy. Okay, with that, I think I don't have much time left. I will hand back to the MC to take over.
Sure, thank you so much, everyone. Before we wrap up today's session, we will have a bit of time for Q&A if there's anyone who would like to ask any questions at all. Anyone? Question? It's not every day we get, yep.
Here on the panel we have experts from Singapore as well as from Malaysia. If you were a foreign investor, where would you invest? Singapore or Malaysia?
Okay. Since Dr. Lee picked up the mic, I think he has a certain view on this. Let Dr. Lee start first.
I was still thinking of passing the mic to Chris. But okay. If you are asking me if I have the money, if I were to invest, and I'm looking at the spend, because I'm probably looking at the next 10 to 20 years, I will actually look at KL, because why? I mean, if you look at in terms of economic growth, Singapore economic growth probably will be about 2 to 3%, and we reach that state of development that we will not see a very rapid economic growth. But in Malaysia, I see the potential there. Of course, there's still very higher risk, but I mean, if 10 to 20 years, given the kind of budget, I think probably I would say KL.
Chris, you want to cast a view?
It's really impossible for me to give an impartial view because I've lived in Malaysia most of my life, and you know, I think it has tremendous potential long term. Of course, many people would like to buy in Singapore. I think Singapore probably offers greater stability, perhaps greater liquidity, and perhaps intrinsically a rock-solid currency over time. But I couldn't bring myself to pay all this stamp duty to the government. So, you know, I think with the last general election, the interest on the part of Malaysians to buy in Singapore has probably diminished. The stamp duty is a bit of a killer, and I really do think that more Malaysians now are turning their focus back onto opportunities in Malaysia for long-term gain.
Ismail?
For me, I'm very invested in Greater KL, and because I believe in the years to come, Singapore will continue to do well, I've positioned myself in Iskandar, Malaysia, because I believe in Singapore.
So you view Iskandar, Malaysia as a proxy for Singapore,
An extension.
but you can escape the high stamp duty to buy Singapore. Okay. Any questions from any member? Anyone else? Yes. Can you pass the mic?
Yep.
I said PropertyGuru is a neutral body here amongst all the four of you. What is your view on it?
My view as a serial property investor where I own multiple portfolio in residential, commercial, industrial property in Southeast Asia as well as Australia and UK is I always believe in this rule number 101 of investment. Don't put your eggs into one basket. Don't put all your eggs into one basket. I always believe in diversification. So for me, I own both Singapore property as well as Malaysian property, as well as properties from other countries. So I always believe that when you do diversification, when certain major economic events happen, all your property portfolio prices does not move in one single direction. So some will increase, some will decrease, and that allows you to spread your risk. And secondly, there are different objectives to invest in different countries. As mentioned by the panelists earlier, Singapore is a mature economy, so you don't expect a very high growth in Singapore. But the key word in Singapore is safety. Yeah, safe. So I would say it's a wealth preservation objective to invest in Singapore. Whereas for Malaysia, it's still a growing economy. It doesn't have the kind of aging population that Singapore has. It has a young population, dynamic economy, very strong exporter. One of their glove companies, one of the top glove company in the world. So I will go for Malaysia for some high growth areas like KL, for example. So for me, it's about having different portfolio to perform different objectives. So that eventually you will have a balanced portfolio. Any
Right.
questions?
Any more? Otherwise, we will actually have to wrap up the session. Okay. On that note, please, together, thank the panelists. We have Datuk Christopher, Mr. Ishmael, and Dr. Lee.